bit of a relief today. This is a meeting that's held in public, and there are some members of the public, I believe, who are going to be joining us today remotely, but also it's being recorded, and then the video will be uploaded onto our website after the meeting. I'm going to hand over now to Matt, and welcome to Matt as our Acting Assistant Committee Secretary, who's going to give us our apologies for absence.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Abigail Harris, with Karen attending in her place. Got Phil Clare, sends apologies, and he is attending today. Thank you, Lee. George Galecki, Ross Whitehead, with Gavin deputising for him. Wendy Riani, our lay member. Jason Killins with Rachel attending Jason's place. That's it.
Thanks very much. Any other apologies for absence that anyone wishes or needs to make today? No? And are there any declarations of interest that aren't either already been declared or on the register of interests? Okay, thank you. Just to go through the agenda, there are any interests that people need to declare, then please do it as we come to that agenda. We now move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May. And first of all, I'm seeking approval. There are correct records. Any issues in terms of accuracy from anybody in relation to those minutes? No, then we then have to approve them as a correct record. Thank you. They are approved. Moving on then to the
Hayley, raise your hand then, sorry. You raise your hand then, Hayley. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Any in terms of actions?
Yeah, thank you. 4 actions are proposed to be closed today. So the first one relates to a request for a deep dive into high scoring ambulance risks. This was undertaken at the Quality Safety Outcomes Committee in June, and a summary of that is included within the highlight report under agenda item 6 today. The 3 others related to requests for an update on Nexum 111, on Cochlear and on Glanreed Hospital. And these updates are provided within the Commissioner and Director reports 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, I think, today. The remaining actions are not yet due. Their due date is indicated on the action log. Ongoing discussions with some of these. Some are scheduled for a future JCC strategy session. One also relates to the patient story at the last meeting and the mother and baby unit at Tonna Hospital. That visit has been arranged 28th of July, I believe. So we look to close that at the next meeting. So just the 4 actions proposed to be closed today, Chair.
Thank you. Any observations on that proposal to close those actions? And also noting that, as Maz just said, that many of the actions have not yet reached their due dates. Great. Any other actions or matters arising that have not been captured in the action log that anyone wishes to flag? Good. Thank you very much. Then we move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is setting the scene. Really important that we hear experiences from our patients and staff, and I've had the opportunity to have a brief look at the video again to see it's extremely powerful, and something which I know the committee will be interested in hearing about, and also hear from Welsh Ambulance Service, and I think it's great to want to give some observations as well. But Carol, over to you first of all.
Diolch, David. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm actually going to hand straight over to Liam. As Liam explained, Liam is the Executive Director of Quality and Nursing for the Welsh Ambulance Trust. Just going to give a real short background to the Maxwell story, and how WAST gather their patient experience in terms of improving services for future. So Liam, over to you in terms of anything you want to say in terms of the story, how you gathered it, and the background of gaining patient experience for WAST. We'll then play the story, and we've got 2 slides following that, and we'll take questions at the end, if that's okay.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Chair. If I may, Chair, I'm going to sandwich this story with two experiences that have come off the back of it as well, because I think it demonstrates the continued relevance of not just the experience for both the father and the son in this story, but actually the kind of where it sits in the system. So I shared this story in a senior clinical group a few months ago, and the observation that was made was, in essence, the woman was likely going to die anyway. Why are you sharing it? So I share that because that gives you a sense of, or it gave me a sense of where people's thresholds were in the level of harm that is currently being experienced across the system. And I have to say also, to a degree, the level of personal protection some senior clinicians will be putting around themselves when they're looking and dealing with these very dire experiences. The second anecdote is actually just a few weeks old, and I went to a pub in Chepstow after a walk and got chatting with a set of people, and lovely chat, lovely conversation. My friend threw me under a bus somewhat and shared what I did for a living, so then I get all of the NHS stories. And I listened to a gentleman tell me where he lives, so Chepstow, their experience when a relative had a stroke was to call 999, be told it was going to be 4 hours before we were able to respond, and took the decision based on wider personal experience to put their relative in a car and transport them to Southmead in Bristol. They did that because they knew that they would get the care within 60 minutes. Their relative was admitted, treated, and discharged in just a few days. For me, that was really, really humbling. So when we listen to the words of the son in this story, I ask that we hold on to both of those wider experiences, because that's what makes this story so powerful from my perspective. It's the moral injury, the damage that's occurring for our senior clinicians dealing and working in this situation all of the time, and the confidence of the population that we're serving, such that they're making informed decisions about how they want to carry risk for their families. So I think this is a really strong story, which is should impact for all of us. I think I'm going to play it. Can I check it?
Should I have, when I made the first call, really laid it on thick, told a lot of lies, got her on a red and got them round here straight away? I know that they could have saved her. That is my belief. If she'd have been in the hospital, she would have been saved. That upsets me a lot.
It was just before 2, and I got a call from my dad saying he's called an ambulance for my mother. I come round and I saw for myself my mother was not very well and indeed did need an ambulance. It took several other calls then of repeating the same information, seeing my mother slowly deteriorate over the hours, and it took 6 hours for an ambulance to arrive. They pumped 1.8 litres of basically brown fluid sick from her, which had caused sepsis in the end, which has ultimately led to her death. So this was a time-sensitive matter, that it was a medical emergency that could have been prevented if the ambulance had arrived in time. When I made that final call, I already knew my mother had passed. She was cold, she was not breathing. I told the operator this and conducted CPR, as I say, before the EMTs arrived. They did their very best to save her, but we knew it was futile, and ultimately she was pronounced dead 40 minutes later. Because the death was unexplained, we had to then go through the process of obviously being interviewed by the EMT first responders about the incident. That was followed on then by the police because it was a sudden unexplained death. And then we had the coroner's service turn up, who took away the body. And we were not expecting that outcome. We were not expecting when we called the ambulance originally at 2 that it would end like that. Even today, we're still in a sense of total disbelief that it all panned out like it did.
They released my wife's body to the undertaker. So I got myself sorted out. I'll go down and pay my last respects. No, you can't do that, unfortunately, because she'd been chopped up, basically. He said that, you know, we don't recommend at all that people see the bodies. So unlike any other situation I'd been in, you couldn't go in and basically pay your last respects. Not me, not my family, friends, anybody. We couldn't sort of lay her to rest.
I started the complaints process with the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust very early on because we agreed, because of the 6-hour delay, that this was not acceptable. We needed some answers. Ambulance handover times, along with the pressures of staff being off due to COVID, were I believe, the official reasons. Nobody we spoke to in any time since, in any way, shape or form, has been able to give us a definitive answer of ultimately where does the responsibility lie, what changes have been done that were promised that have actually had an impact. And all this time later, we don't think things have improved. We think they've gotten worse. It's not what we want for our, memory of our mother. We want some sort of, for our own resolution and peace of mind's sake, we need something positive to come out of this so it doesn't happen to anyone else. We've had the apologies and we've had the reasons. We do understand those, we really do. But we're asking, is it acceptable? If this happened to you and your family, could you accept it and move on? And at the moment, we have no resolution to move on.
Life was just there for us. And I'm lost without her. I have to be truthful. You become almost like a joint person, if you were, over that amount of time. Half my life's been ripped away. I know full well that she would not have wanted us to be sitting here weeping and wailing and carrying on, but she would have wanted us to find out what has happened and what justice was. And
if the situation was reversed, she would be doing exactly the same as everything she could. I agree that's the best way to do it, remember the best about her. But unfortunately, as a result of the day, I can honestly say, hand on heart, that from doing the CPR on my mother, who I knew had died, it is the first and last thought I do have every day. I am dreading the day when eventually another member of my family is in a medical emergency and needs that healthcare, because I genuinely don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Liam, anything else you wish to add?
I've got 2 slides actually,
Sure.
as well. That can we pop the slides up? Doesn't matter. So the QSOG story was presented to QSOG on the 2nd of June, and they agreed that, as you'll have heard, the Maxwell's family story needs to be used as a catalyst for change, with a commitment to follow up and demonstrate what tangible improvements that we can make to the service. The committee themselves, I can see Susan opposite me as the chair of QSOG. We were all really deeply moved by the story, and really acknowledge the emotional weight that the story brought, yes, to the family, but to us as individuals. So it was proposed that we did want to bring it and share it with yourselves, to be able to demonstrate what changes have been made, because, as the family said, the changes and the learning from such an experience is really important for us and for them more importantly. And really, what the erosion of public trust has done and for them both as a family and what they can say about their story for their mum. So we've just got the one following slide, which I'm going to hand over to Gavin, who is the Deputy Director of Commissioning for Ambulances, as Ross is unable to make it today, and to Liam, just to go through these and show what has changed as a result of this story.
Thank you, Carol. So just in terms of the patient feedback enhancements, there are plans underway within the ambulance service to introduce text messaging and outreach and video submissions to gather further patient feedback. This is aimed at broadening patient experience capture and improving the responsiveness of the organisation. Clinical response model, we'll talk a little bit about that later, but that focuses on prioritising life-threatening cases, and whilst also have some ongoing initiatives around staff well-being and resilience, which Liam touched on earlier. They have implemented trauma risk management and psychological support for staff who are dealing with this on a regular basis, and also have ongoing initiatives to reduce sickness absence and enhance the resilience of the workforce. There is current feedback in WAST. The feedback they do get is normally through direct contact, but there's now active engagement from WAST with forums and groups to gather broader input. And as Carol mentioned, the QSOC discussion emphasis very much on understanding the experiences of our families, and also the focus on evaluating the impact of recent changes and attention to measurable outcomes. Liam, would you like to add anything in terms of some of the learning within the organisation?
Just, I think when we are talking in our various settings, we often talk about the targets that we are seeking to achieve, whether they're targets associated with a cardiac arrest or another nominated emergency, for example, a stroke or a myocardial infarct. The thing that always strikes me is there is always somebody with the patient, or nearly always somebody with the patient, who is doing their best to try and care for, look after someone as they deteriorate in front of them, and often they do deteriorate. And that person will then often make the phone calls back to us seeking support. And that call will be taken by a band 3 call taker who will go through a prioritisation exercise, and then will inevitably go through to our clinicians. So I think one of the things that this story, and I'm afraid many others, have really reinforced for us as a trust is that it's the harm that comes from a delay in being able to respond goes beyond the patient that we measure the harm against. The harm against the individual is significant and huge, but for the family, the friend, the public member sitting with that individual when they make the 999 call, for particularly I have to say for our clinicians who are often on the receiving end of that individual in absolute panic, in absolute fear for their loved one or the stranger that they found, that impact goes on. It doesn't evaporate at the end of the 999 call. It continues, and it transfers into the wider NHS in terms of confidence of services and into the pathway of the individual, because of course that sets up the patient experience from the outset. So I think for us, that's one of the key areas of learning we've taken from this case and others like these in recent times is that kind of psychological impact that extends beyond the measurable physical harm, avoidable harm that comes to the patient. So that's probably my final reflection to share with you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Liam. Thank you for your candour in sharing your reflections on behalf of the class. Perhaps we can take the screen down. Thanks. Any reflections or observations in what was a really powerful and quite moving story? Susan.
I'm just trying to, as the story, as the film was unfolding, of course, it's something that I've obviously, as Carol described, seen before. But I'm thinking in terms of how long have patient stories been part of committee board agendas, and it's more than a decade of stories, but probably 15 plus years. I think this is one that's impacted me probably the most. And of course, as Liam's already described it, that there is also, of course, something about one's own psychology that one brings to situations. The dignity of the family members, the abruptness, I think, that Liam described in terms of some of the conversations with clinical colleagues. But for me, it encapsulates perfectly a situation where, in essence, just that absolute importance of being compassionate to everyone in that situation. And it's really, really brought home to me, beyond individuals, family members, but also thinking about the staff and that moral injury that Liam's described, and the psychological impacts that is going on day after day after day. So, just be for me, Chair, a bid for us to, really live into compassion.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It was really moving. Thank you, Liam, for that. And I was thinking about what you were saying, Liam, about the clinician or whoever it was who'd said, "Oh, why are you showing us this? Yeah, she probably would have died anyway." I think that's what you said, and I think that may be true. The outcome might have been that clinical sort of outcome, but if people had been treated differently, that pebble thrown into the pond would not have had the awful ripples it's had. I think that, as Susan was saying, if there had been more compassion. And it isn't just because we're human beings. We should want there to be more compassion. It would also be better for everyone. It would be better for I think it would be better for the clinicians in the end. It would be better for everyone, easier to deal with. And this wouldn't have. They would feel better. We wouldn't be talking about this now because they wouldn't be complaining. Not as I don't think they would. And I've been through something quite similar, fairly similar, quite recently, and I have nothing to complain about. Nothing, and So I just think that it's not just about outcomes, and that's all we can see, isn't it? It's a paper and outcomes and numbers and things. It's about the way outcomes are achieved, which is exactly what Liam said, much better than me.
Thanks, Nia. Nicola and then Suzanne.
Yeah, thanks, Liam, and this hugely powerful story. And I feel really strongly about kind of how we manage that unseen risk in the community. And I think the work that's going on around the Task Force 45 and trying to get a culture shift around handovers is really important. And I think, I regularly have internal meetings about what would you do if that was your mother lying on the floor? Would you have a different response to the way you've responded now? So I think it's a really important test for us. So I think the work we're doing on handovers is fundamental. But to go alongside that, the other bit is the alternative pathways work, which I know is part of this national work, because some of those long delays are people that potentially is alternative pathways for us outside the hospital, and they're the ones, because they will prioritise the ones most at risk when they get to the hospital. The other issue is around categorisation, and I know some of the changes you've made, Liam, around the front end because there's a request going on today actually about a case where somebody's died but had a long response time. The categorisation changed as it went along, but did we get that right? Because we have got a red release process, so that if someone is life-threatening, we need to release. So I think the work we've done around that front end calling out hopefully will help that bit. And then there's a wider issue around kind of accountability in culture, because sometimes I feel that the accountability sits with me as the chief executive, but where else does, because ultimately the front door ED docs feel accountability for their department. The people on the wards carry the risk and feel accountable for the risk in front of them. But that unseen risk, where is that accountability, and how do we change the culture of a different type of ownership other than us having to carry that accountability as well? So I think there's something for us to think about as part of the handover work. And the other bit is we don't routinely, and I don't know, Liam, where you and Rachel, but where we capture. So there was an inquest on Friday, there was an inquest today, there's a case here, you probably got many. Where do we report the impact of community harm as a result of this? That on the high profile we don't really see. So we report what happens in our hospitals, in-hospital mortality, SIs, but that bit I just don't think it is as visible to maybe as part of that accountability and culture piece. So just a few comments really, because, you know, I constantly test that if that was your loved one lying on the floor, what would we do different at the other end of the system? Because, you know, it's a real concern for us.
Suzanne should mean that I'll bring Liam back in.
Yes, thanks everybody, and thanks to Liam and the team for bringing us this story, and particularly thanks to the Maxwell family for sharing it in such a dignified way. You know, my reflection sitting here thinking about my commissioner role is this is not the first story. We've been hearing stories as devastating as the one that the Maxwells have just shared, so in such a dignified way with us for some years now. So the question I'm asking myself is, are we doing enough? Are we moving quickly enough? And are we doing the right things? If I was to ask myself in this commissioning role here that we have today, are we moving in the right direction at the pace we need to? I'm not sure I could say I was assured. You know, lived experience, just done a weekend on call, very, very long waits in our communities still. Systems under enormous pressure and struggling to respond and manage the flow across the system. Despite all of the efficiency work that we've done, both WAST and health boards, despite the improvements that are clearly being made across our system in terms of handover improvements, we are still experiencing very long waits. So I think Nicola's point about models of care is really relevant. And what have we recently rechecked our demand and capacity, looked at the projected models for demand, and incorporated the new models of care at a range of efficiencies into that to understand, are we creating enough capacity in our system to handle the level of demand, or are we going to continue to have these challenges because we are resource constrained? I think these are some questions that we do have to ask ourselves, and clearly the Task and Finish group will help us. But really my sense of that is, and Phil's online somewhere, or possibly his colleagues in the room will tell us that looks to me like, you know, really good operational tactical level work. But does that answer the question? And lastly, just to Liam's point around the moral injury to colleagues, I mean, it's clear, isn't it? And it's not just colleagues in the ambulance service, it's colleagues right across our system who are, whether they're dealing with the family in distress in the way that you described, Liam, as a call handler, or they're in the EU department responding, or they're in the coroner's office or the complaints department. All of our colleagues will be devastated by these kinds of stories. And I suppose that's just something for us to bear in mind as we continue this work. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask Shamin to come in, then Paul, then Liam, and then Rachel, and then I'm going to quickly then come to Gavin just to pull this together in terms of any reflections in terms of our responsibility as commissioners. So Shamin first.
I was just going to say, hugely part of the story, and thank you to the family for sharing that with us for learning and development. But the slide that you shared, you said something around more work being done to collect these stories and experiences from families. And I was just wondering about the different types of families and different types of people and different groups of people, and how we would make sure that we were getting the right informed and perspective of different people.
We'll come back on that when you say Charlotte doing what we're doing and what Weston's doing. Paul, then Rachel, then I'll come to Liam at the end, and then over to you, Gavin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And yeah, like everybody, I mean, you can't fail to be moved by a story like that. And like Nicola, we've had recent inquests, and Liam will know of one particularly high-profile inquest that we've had recently, where there was a view from the coroner that the long lie for the patient at home contributed in part to that person's death. So I think this isn't unfortunately a one-off. This is we've all heard many stories. I guess for me, as Suzanne said, there's something about how do we understand what this all means and what we're doing collectively. There's lots of work going on, and I speak in my organisation where we've got a real focus now on the ambulance handovers, and that is having a positive impact and seeing a real positive improvement in our handovers. I guess the thing is, as commissioners, I suppose, is also how are we working to understand how the conveyance to hospital is improving or not, depending on, so if we're getting ambulances released quicker, how are we making sure those ambulances are available as quickly as possible to get back on the road to respond quickly? And I guess that's the bit for me that I need, it would be useful to have a bit more understanding of, because I think we talk rightly a lot about the handovers because it has been really, really a big contributor to this. But I know, for example, in our patch, and Rachel knows that we've had several conversations about this, our conveyance rates are stubbornly high and they're not coming down despite the release of ambulances quicker. So what is that? Is that a demographic issue in our population? Is it a cultural issue in our population about calling ambulances for things when they could go elsewhere? Is it how the crews are allocated? And I think we need to, this task force work nationally is great, but I also think there's something at a local level in each health board really getting underneath that data, because one of the things I know that WAST have a lot of is data and information about what's going on with individual patients, and I'm not sure we're always using that as well as we could be to really understand both the pattern of demand and how it's flowing through our system, but also, as Suzanne said, and using that data and demand information to help plan our services more effectively, so that actually we try and avoid these situations in an anticipated way rather than a reactive way. So I think there's something there in terms of our, as Suzanne said, our commissioner role about really thinking about how we might be able to use that data to help inform some of our more strategic conversations with the ambulance service.
Thanks very much, Paul. Rachel?
Thanks, Chair. So, yeah, I just wanted to say a kind of a big thank you to you and the committee for bringing this story and for allowing us to share this story. It's one of a number that we, within WAST have heard over the years, as colleagues have said, from different perspectives, different lenses, but often with that same great sadness that we then feel that we're not able to provide the service that we should have done. So a big thank you to that. And also, I think to your point, Nicola, what I feel in, I know I'm not in the room, but that sense of share, what this story brings then is a sense of a shared accountability. We feel it definitely, and I know that as chief executives and as a joint committee, you feel it too. So I just wanted to say that there's, I think, perhaps something a couple of people have talked about data. I think there probably is some work we could do with Ross in thinking about how we present and work with you to present data either to this committee that is perhaps a bit more of a narrative and a story that sits behind some of the numbers, but also to the committees and the groups that sit below here in a bit more of a meaningful way. And the other thing I was going to say is that I know as part of the JCC plan for this year, we've got both a review of the model, the ambulance model, and also start to look at some of the benchmarking. And I think, it's going to be really good to work with you collectively on, scrutinising the model that we're developing, as a couple of you have said, to make sure that we can be convinced that we are going in the right direction, and using some of that benchmarking data, Paul, to look at health board level and comparisons between health boards to really understand where the differences lie and what we could do about that. So, but mainly Ian, and I just wanted to say a big thank you for letting us bring this story, because it is a really powerful one, and I do think it brings a sense of impetus, doesn't it, to the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Lee?
Yeah, so if I may, Chair, I'll just respond to some of the comments and queries building on what Rachel's just shared. So in terms of the accountability piece, I think, I would signpost the papers that go to our trust board. There's a chief exec's report that with regard to avoidable harm, and that has a presentation which is based on our actuals, but also uses a study from London to determine what potential harm is occurring in the system. So I think there's a couple of papers that go through our trust board which may be helpful, and our quality committee, which I know JCC members will get informed of, if you like, or briefed on, has very comprehensive papers that pull together all of the various independent reports that take place in this space. I think in terms of the Wait 45 group, I was just reflecting on Paul's comments, and I've just come from a Wait 45 task group meeting. And I think one of the things, Gavin, we might want to do is make sure that Susan and Paul's comments are built into the brief, because I think a lot of the data analysis that we're looking for and at is driven by the quality improvement measures that individual organisations are going to take. And I think that strategic question of, have we got our demand capacity modelling right? Are we clear about conveyance decisions? Are we clear about mobilisation to respond times? Those things which give health boards confidence that for the efforts that they're making inside the hospital, we are playing our full part outside of the hospital with primary care and community services. So I think, Gavin, that may be one for us to pick up through the Wait 45 group explicitly from this conversation. I would comment just marginally on the mobilisation. There's a bit of a shift, and Paul, I'm just going to own on behalf of the organisation. I've had several conversations already where improvements are coming through from health boards, and there's a health board observation sometimes that our people are not moving as quickly as they might expect. If Lee was on the call, Lee would be very clear that there are very proactive steps taken through the operations team to make sure those mobilisation times are achieved. They're measured to within seconds, and where we are not meeting our mobilisation post discharge, that's the stuff that ops pick up every time. So there's a bit of a cultural thing, because we've had a very long time with this that we need to kind of unpick again in some form, but there is a very clear operational drive to make sure that we are maximising our mobilisation time as quickly as we are able to. And apologies, I don't know the lady in the room who commented on patient experience and diversity and outreach. I can't name you, sorry, but I will. I think there's two things that I would just give some assurance on here. Firstly, we do some very direct outreach with representative groups. So we do some bespoke stuff, reaching out into communities, particularly those where the normal NHS routes to kind of getting feedback doesn't give us the diversity of thought and experience. So we do that proactively. We've been doing that through our patient experience and community involvement team for a number of years. The work that Gavin referred to, we've got a proposal in at the moment with the Information Commissioner Officer that we're seeking approval of a data sharing arrangement in which we will be then able to follow up with an SMS to patients directly who've called 1s and 9s. A lot of our feedback is based on quite small numbers in the scheme of things, and what we want to do is get to a larger level of outreach. The intent being that we will use that then to think about how we go into different populations, how we use the different media forms that are available to us to ensure people are giving us their experience in all parts of the community across Wales. So we do a lot of bespoke work at the moment, but what we're trying to do is move to a digital solution that we can get to greater scale on over the coming period. And we're just waiting for ICO approval to be able to move that forward.
Thanks very much, Liam, and thank you very much again for your reflections. Been very helpful in terms of bringing this story alive to us. Gavin, any final thoughts from? And again, I'm very conscious we're sitting here as commissioners in terms of our responsibilities in relation to what we've heard today.
Yeah, absolutely. So just drawing that all together. So on the review of benchmarking and the model, that is firmly in the JCC work plan for this year. We're working collectively, Rachel, with Stacey and her colleagues from finance and value. So thanks for referencing that. And we are making progress with that piece of work. Just on the task force comments from Liam, fully supportive of that work, Liam, and we'll make sure that we're building that in. You're right, a lot of the service improvement work is taking place there, and we are working with health boards and WAST around that task force work. In relation to working with health boards, Paul's point around the data, there's a huge amount there, Paul, in terms of conveyancing by health board, by lower super output area, by call type, by respiratory cases, falls, etc. I'm not sure colleagues across health boards, operational colleagues, are aware of that wealth of data that's there, which we can get into and actually understand what conveyancing rates look like, but look at a super granular level, because that may impact what we do with health board colleagues. More than happy to reach out to the right colleagues in health boards to take forward that piece of work. And in terms of vast collection of patient experience information, we've already covered that. So thank you, Chief.
Thanks very much. I'm very conscious that we've been talking a bit about accountability, and my sense is there is a shared responsibility and an accountability for us as commissioners, but also then with WAST as provider and also the health boards as well, to make sure that we are creating, as a commission, the right environment and resourcing to reduce the risk of these sorts of incidents that occur in. And I think the very fact that the Maxwell family shared their story is something that certainly will stay with me for some time. And just want to convey our thanks to them. It may or may not be appropriate, but perhaps we can have a conversation to see whether it might or might not be appropriate for me to write to the Maxwell family in the light of that. But let's make a decision about that. I wouldn't want to create any further challenge for the family. But let's have a conversation about that. I'm very conscious there's lots of work taking place. I hope we get the time at some point just to step back collectively at what's happening, what the impact is, what the impact of that action is. And there's something about pace and scale and rigour around this as well, which I think is really important. Okay, thank you very much for that, Liam. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Really appreciated. Moving on then to the chair's report. It's to be received by the committee. Very happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Thank you very much. Moving on to the Chief Commissioner's report. Hugh.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take it as read, but maybe I just wanted to pull a couple of things out this month. One of the issues that we've talked about for a while is recruitment and the number of vacancies. So I think just to report that we're making very good progress. Obviously, we're in that sort of interregnum and waiting for people to start. Hopefully, come September, October, we'll see a notable difference. In terms of just a couple of specifics, we've talked before about working with colleagues. Chief execs have kindly lent in and offered help in this, and Alex at HAW has offered help. So we'll be having conversations in the next week now, having gone through the recruitment, about a couple of development opportunities we'll be looking to put out across Wales to help us on some of these programmes. And specifically, it's in the board actions in terms of public health. Yolo and I have been having conversations with colleagues in Public Health Wales. I think as of yesterday afternoon, we've secured a route through, which hopefully would mean we're looking to progress a process of to recruit somebody into work with Yolo relatively quickly now. So there's good progress being made on that. But obviously, that will firm up in a little bit over the next few weeks. Other issues, I did say before that we were we previously met in CCLG. And we were struggling in terms of getting full engagement across all health boards. So I just wanted to thank everybody, because last month we met, we had really good representation from health boards, and I think it just meant that we had a much more robust conversation about some of the key issues going forward. So I think, looking to take that forward, that's really going to be a key group for us to use and work with throughout the rest of the year. And I've highlighted a couple of items at the end of the report there, which we put under the heading of programme of work, just to pick up. And I'm looking at Hayley, because Hayley seems to be working closely with us on a number of these. But these are pieces of work that maybe we haven't discussed so far. Were most probably under the radar in terms of what the expectation was in the programme of work and the plan for this year. But I think all of them have got quite high political profile at the moment. So we're having to look at realigning some of our resources to make sure that we pick up these all Wales pieces of work. So I think in each of them, we're highlighting there's more work to go on, and particularly around the SARC, sexual assault referral centres. We've now agreed with all the parties that we'll be bringing a report back to this committee in November in terms of the way forward on that. But I just wanted to highlight all of those, because they are meaning that we have to reprofile some of the work we're doing to make sure we prioritise them.
Thank you. Any questions or observations on Hugh's report? Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Hugh. That's really helpful. I know last board we talked about a vacancy rate of 29%, and I recognise that there are national importance to things like SARC and CHC. I am concerned that the amount of capacity we have to address some of our real core issues, particularly in terms of finance and performance, there's a balancing act between the two. And I suppose two questions: what's our sort of current vacancy rate? And I guess the senior leadership team is cognizant of the fact that we have to balance between what commitments we pick up from elsewhere and doing our core business as well.
Thank you, Paul. That's actually helpful in terms of the conversation with the team. In terms of the vacancy rate, I tried to do my sort of quick calculation, looking through some of the papers yesterday. It's not very much at the moment. That's purely because we're waiting for people to start. So I'm hoping over the next sort of 2 months now, we'll see that rate come down as people actually join us. But it's still sitting at a similar level at the moment. In terms of the balance, certainly we're going to have conversations today on the finance. We've got pieces of work which are coming up to the surface that we really need to do. And I think there's a conversation we're going to need us throughout. Maybe I think we'll lead into that today and bring back in September in terms of what we do need to do to reprioritise our work this year. Yeah, a plan is written at a moment in time, I suppose. Yeah, there are different priorities. There's different things hitting us. So I think we are conscious that we can't just try to do everything. So there will be a conversation. What we have tried to do with the plan this year is make sure it's spread throughout the year, but we may also have to look at the profiling of that as well.
I'm very conscious that the areas you've listed in your report of where we've been asked to take on some additional work and responsibility, that there sits an obligation with us as a national commissioning body to respond to some of those requests. But we also need to make sure that we balance that against the delivery of our foundation plan, which we've agreed.
Absolutely.
Making sure that actually we get that balance right between the requests for coming in for new work, making sure that we are clear in terms of what resource might come with that in order to facilitate and assist us, and then alongside the importance of delivering the plan, particularly when we've already identified as we come on later some risk within that plan, some increased risk within that plan. So all of that I think is something that's troubling me a bit, and it's important that we make sure that we're wrestling with that and understanding that tension as we try to respond to some of those requests, but also the imperative of the current plan.
Share that entirely, Chair.
Yeah. Hayley.
Yeah, thank you. You raised the point around that balance, as you say, between the foundation plan and other priorities. And, I think that just huge thanks to Hugh for working alongside us to work out how we can take some of those key areas of work forward, but recognising that I think we'll need to update the committee as those discussions continue, particularly with Welsh Government with regard to continuing healthcare and the additional requirement on all health boards to implement direct payments by the beginning of the next financial year, which will impact us all. My other point was I'm really pleased, Hugh, to hear that the CCLG is maturing and that the membership is strengthening and delivering what you need. I just wondered whether we could just pick up specifically in terms of a standard agenda item on the CCLG, that we do pick up the discussion on the progress of delivery against the foundation plan, in particular some items later which we'll be discussing, including savings and transformation. But I think it's a really important mechanism to support our consideration and assurance coming through to the JCC. So I'm pleased to hear it's working well, Hugh. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments or observations on Hugh's report? Hugh?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you, Hayley. Hayley raised this with me last week, and I think it's really useful in terms of a way of working that actually we're going to raise issues with the committee today, which we're going to go away and obviously with a steer be working on. But it's important that most probably we have that sort of engine room to work with the health boards on this through the CCLG in the future. So I think that really works well. And just maybe candidly to say that those items that I put in there as the new items, they're not things that have suddenly sprung out of nowhere. They're things where clearly people understand the JCC have already agreed to do work on, and unfortunately, most probably they weren't flowing through to our work plan properly in the past. So there's a little bit of catch up going on with some of those.
And perhaps just to add to that for committee colleagues, that these items are part of the regular updates that Hugh and I have. So again, that Hugh is keeping me informed in between JCC meetings, the conversations that are taking place, but also some of the risks associated with some of the issues that have been flagged within the report. And as he quite rightly says, making sure that, and this is about the organisational culture as well, that when we've been asked to take on additional responsibilities, that conversations may have been taking place, but then not fed through into those more strategic conversations that we need to have either around this table or as we develop our annual plan. So that's something, again, which is being looked at. Great, thank you very much for that, for your report. Let's move on now to risk. Matt.
The report presents the risk register as at 31st of May, with risk scoring 15 and above. This version of the risk register will be presented to the CTM Audit Risk and Assurance Committee at its meeting in August. Each of these high risks have been assigned to either the Quality, Safety and Outcomes Subcommittee or the Planning, Performance and Finance Subcommittee. And these groups have a role to play in monitoring and scrutinising the risks and providing assurance back to the joint committee members. The report does pick up comments and observations from the recent meetings. In section 2, the risk summary identifies 19 risks with a score of 15 or above. 17 of those are commissioning risks across the commissioning portfolio. And table 1 identifies 4 new commissioning risks recently added. The 2 outstanding or remaining risks are corporate risks relating to business continuity and the financial position. And also at the top of page 4, members are advised that a number of actions and activities have taken place since May, and I'm sure that some of the commissioning directors will pick up on some of these in their reports in later agenda items. Just for colleagues to be aware, under agenda item 5, the corporate governance register, we pick out some key areas from the survey of effectiveness recently undertaken, and the development of the risk register and the risk management approach is one of those 4 key areas. So joint committee members are asked to note the report today and to approve the risk register dated 31st of May, please.
Thanks, Matt. And again, just so that I've had a conversation earlier with Matt around the risk register, and I guess I'm very conscious that there's a lot more work's required in terms of stepping back and looking at risk overall, being really clear in terms of what our approach to risk is and risk appetite. And that's some work, no doubt, the new board secretary, the committee secretary, will want to lead on. I think you need to prioritise that, will be my view. I'm conscious that there's seems that there's quite a lot of change in the risk register, but no risks have been escalated, de-escalated or closed. So there's a question mark for me then in terms of, so what's the point of the mitigations? Are they having an impact in terms of actually making a difference? Because I'd have thought that in terms of some of the mitigations that we are putting in place, that would have shifted things slightly in some areas. So I guess it's about that sort of level of assurance that would be helpful for, I think, for the committee to have in terms of the approach that is taken in between JCC meetings at senior team level, but also through the committees of the articulation of risks and then the robustness of the mitigations that we're putting in place to ensure that they shift and change. So it's just an observation from my perspective. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, I think that's very fair. I think what we've got, I find it unusual to have this many high-level risks. And there's something for me about understanding what are our strategic risks. And I think we've concentrated quite a lot over the last couple of months in terms of almost setting up our accountability mechanism through the sort of plan for this year, working on our operating framework, and then we'll have conversations today about our finance. And I think one of the next big things for us is around that committee assurance framework. And I think we've got the new committee secretary joining. I think it's quite clear that it's his first priority, and something I think a fresh pair of eyes would help us on. I think my observation is this is almost like we have all the raw materials here, but we haven't put a system around them in terms of the mitigation. It's the process. At the moment, we've got all the risks here, so there shouldn't be more risks we're not looking at. But it's how we manage these and how we use these risks to manage our business and our commission and what we do. So yeah, I think it's a priority for the next quarter.
Thanks very much, Carol.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, Chair, in the fact that we used to have very similar conversations at the Quality Patient Safety Committee in terms of the length of time that that risks that services in escalation seem to not ever get out of that level of escalation. And as a result, from an escalation perspective, we did put an escalation trajectory in order to be able to demonstrate the work and the impact that work was having in terms of moving the level of that risk whilst they were in escalation. So it may be something that, based on the work that's going to be taking place in the future, that we need to really look at being able to describe that in more detail.
Any other reflections on the risk register?
To ask one question. So there are a number there that are Cardiff and Wales specific, and I just wondered, in that case, does that mean that we've assessed the risk in the other providers and deemed them not high, or are they just effectively omitted from it? So neonatal workforce was, I guess, the one that was standing out to me. Are we to deem from this that we don't have workforce risks in neonatal in the other providers, or is it just that we've had some received some from Cardiff we haven't received from others?
So from a Cardiff perspective, obviously neonatal has been in level 3 escalation for quite some time. So, and workforce is part of the reason why the service has been in escalation for such a long period of time. We recognise the improvements that Cardiff have made in terms of workforce and being able to staff the commissioned beds. So it's a particular issue for Cardiff. I would say that, obviously we recognise that neonatal workforce is an issue more widely across the board, but it's specifically on the risk register for Cardiff because it's related to the escalation.
Thank you. Nia, then Hayden.
Thank you. I was looking at this and I was looking at some of them. An awful lot of actions have been taken in the action plan column, but the risk number hasn't changed at all. And in a lot of them it says, and it just seems that are we doing the right thing then? Do you know what I mean? It seems that we're doing lots of stuff, but it doesn't seem to be changing anything. And I think that we've been very much concentrated on the two most catastrophic risks over time, and this is a lot of stuff. We need to look at all of these in the same amount of depth, it seems to me, or at least in more depth than we have. And I don't think this committee is the right place to do it. Maybe the risk committee is, but we can't look at these again and the numbers be the same again if we're taking more and more action. Can we? Is that realistic?
I think that's the hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I think. Hayley.
Yeah, thank you. I welcome that further review, Hugh, that you suggested, and I think it is important that as a full JCC that we sort of have that regular review of the risks, particularly the moderation across sort of the risks that are being presented. But could you remind me, apologies, I don't recall this, but in terms of the work that we've done as a JCC on our risk appetite, and in particular the point Nia raised, which is that point at which we will tolerate risk, did we complete that? I just can't recall if we finalised that work. I know we had some workshops on it, but I'm just trying to remember whether we did finalise that, because I think it's also about at what point do we set a risk appetite for the JCC and whether we need to revisit that as part of the arrangements as well.
Yeah, I don't think we concluded that, Hayley, is my understanding. We started to have conversations around this risk appetite in the context of a clarity and understanding of what are the key risks. But I don't think we then taken that into that further really important discussion about what level of risk are we prepared to tolerate and at what level and over what period of time. That's not something I don't think we've come to a conclusion of. But Stacey,
yeah, no, Yeah, no, absolutely right. I think we've done a lot of work in the background as a team, and what's really evident is the level of risk appetite per health board is quite different. So it'll be really helpful for us to bring that back in a commissioning context here, when we're thinking about it on a normal basis. And Aaron starting later on this year, Hugh, and around, maybe that's a good opportunity for us to use maybe some time in a development session just to bring that to a bit of a conclusion.
Thanks. I think the plan was for November's development session, but don't quote me on that. I think it's in the work plan.
Right. And Suzanne?
So I'm going to repeat something I've often said when we get to this conversation. I think the point that colleagues make about the residual risk after mitigation is really key, and we do need to understand the extent to which our mitigations are impacting on the level of risk we're carrying, and that was, you know, writ large in the patient experience story that we heard earlier. But I would also say that these are the risks that we have documented and are aware of, and there is a huge level of system risk that is unquantified, unspecified and unknown, and we mustn't forget that.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, the point I was just about to make is, so at least we've captured risk here. What don't we know about? And that's the thing that should be bothering us as well, making sure that we are then taking time just collectively to step back and to look at the risk landscape that we are all operating within, and to make sure that we have captured and we are cognizant of what the key risks are, and making sure that we're putting plans in place to mitigate those, or are accepting we're tolerating some of those risks. And to what level? Susan, then we'll move on.
A final sort of question, Chair, in terms of the delegation of key risks to subcommittees, and the ability of those subcommittees to actually manage to, you know, come up with meaningful conclusions that will change things.
I think it's important then we have that. It's not just about then the assessment of risk, but it's then making sure we've got the architecture in place that facilitates us either here or at senior team level, or at departmental level, or at committee level, to make sure those risks are being mitigated and managed. Useful conversation. We seem to be having this regularly, though. That's the concern. It's a regular conversation. We do need to make sure that once the new committee secretary is in place, that this is a significant priority for them. Right, thank you then. Let's move on to the directorate reports. And first of all, Gavin, again, assume you've read the reports, put out anything in particular you think we want to bring to our attention, and there may be some questions that we've got.
Your comments on, thank you. So just on the emergency ambulance before framework, colleagues will be aware that WASP implemented successfully the revised ambulance response model on the 1st of July as part of a 12-month pilot. That change reflects a strategic shift away from time-based targets to more clinically driven outcome-focused care. That has introduced two new categories: purple category for those patients in cardiac or respiratory arrest, and red category for patients at imminent risk of arrest without an urgent intervention. I'm pleased to say, Chair, that that process went extremely well. We undertook a debrief process with WASP, Welsh Government, and JCC colleagues on the 4th of July, and a follow-up on the 11th of July. No significant issues reported as those changes took place. So well done to WASP with that implementation. Over to ambulance patient handover, which we touched on earlier. So the National Ambulance Handover Task Force has been established. That meets regularly and reports to the CABSEC via the NHS Leadership Board. Notably, several hospital sites across Wales since the establishment of that group have recently improved ambulance handover performance. That has contributed to a national reduction in lost hours being seen, with fewer patients waiting over 45 minutes for handover at hospital sites. I know we'll come on to the performance report later. We'll go into that in a bit more detail. Additionally, early indications have shown improved response times in the community for those patients awaiting a response. So pleased to see the impact handover delays have had on response from the ambulance service there. In terms of NEPS capacity issues, so following the last joint committee meeting, as who alluded to earlier, a more detailed discussion has happened within CCLG on the 24th of June. The group gave us a clear direction for the Ambulance Services 111 commissioning team on the priority areas to improve capacity and what areas to avoid in terms of improving that service further. So we'll now take that detailed work through the non-emergency patient transport delivery assurance group, and members will be kept informed of developments as required. In terms of NHS 111 and the digital front end, colleagues need to be aware that the website and symptom checkers as they currently stand are out of date and are in need of improvement. This was highlighted by a recent Audit Wales report on urgent and emergency care. Together with the Chief Commissioner and the Six Doors Programme and Welsh Government, we have secured additional funding, and whilst are in the process of updating all of that in readiness for this coming winter. And the aim of that is to accelerate improvements this year, focus on high-risk areas and improve those digital systems and take pressure off the telephony service. I'll take the rest of the report as read, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments or observations? Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Kevin. That's helpful. I welcome the move, obviously, in the new clinical response model towards a more outcome-focused approach. I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that there's still a Welsh Government expectation that purple and red will be between sort of 6 to 8 minutes. So there's still a time-based element in that monitoring. And I think one of the, there has been a clarity and a transparency about the way that the 8 minutes has enabled the monitoring. And one of my slight concerns about the new model is that we run the risk of having a period of time where we actually don't have a clear, easy to understand way of monitoring performance. So I'm just nervous about moving towards the outcome of that time expectation, which is still in the mix, being part of the discussion as well.
Absolutely, Paul, and that is still a feature. We're still monitoring that time on a regular basis. I'm aware of progress and month-to-date performance on a daily basis. I know Rachel wants to come in, so we are still tracking performance in that respect. Too early to report formally on that, so I wouldn't want to bring the numbers here. But yeah, I'm sure Rachel will want to expand from an Anderson's perspective.
Thanks, Paul, and then Rachel.
Thanks, Chair. Just back to the point about the 111 and the online symptom checker. Obviously, that's a really important front end for people if they're unsure what to do over the winter. And I'm just wanting to make sure, I guess, that we tally this up with other bits of work that are going on around things like virtual wards and prioritising care for certain groups of patients, such as those with breast issues and other things. Because where would you want to invest our energies would be on the people that are probably the highest risk of admission over hospital, who we'd like to divert elsewhere. So I guess I'm just seeking assurance that we're going to try and tie this together, which I know Rachel is well cited on some of those things as well. But I guess it's just making sure that, because there are lots of different things going on in different places around the whole urgent and emergency care pathway, and I just want to make sure that perhaps that they're all joined up and that are telling a similar story to the people who are actually who are the end users of the service.
Hold on that for a minute. I'll bring Rachel in and then come back to you. Rachel.
Yes, thank you. So just on that last point, I think you mentioned in your report, Gavin, that there'll be a session, I think, a development session looking at 111. So to your point, Paul, I think in August, that's the idea, is that, and my sense certainly would be, we bring the digital, what the 111 in its widest sense for, how does it link into all of those aspects of the urgent care system that you just talked about. So I'm hoping that we will be able to tie that together. We as an organisation have also, I know we're very grateful for the work, Gavin, that you and colleagues have done to secure some additional resource into the digital front end. We've also put some of our own capital resource actually into that front end and the symptom checker this year, or we are putting that in this year as well. But just to your point, Paul, around time, I think what this new performance framework says is that that the outcome for patients in cardiac arrest and respiratory arrest should be the top measure. So the numbers and the who we actually enable to survive either to the hospital or to be discharged from hospital eventually. And the rates within Wales are some of the lowest in the UK for that, and certainly internationally. So that is the focus, and all the evidence points to there being a number of factors which affect people's survival. The first one is how quickly we recognise that somebody's in cardiac arrest. So we will be measuring from our perspective how quickly we know that somebody's in cardiac arrest, how quickly CPR is started. So there should be a big national programme now in trying to increase numbers of people who are trained in CPR. Third thing is how quickly we get a defib to that patient. So again, that's a national piece of work, making sure we've got defibs in the right places. And I know if our director of paramedicine was here, he'd say that if you look at the spread of them in deprived areas, we don't see defibrillators. We see them more often in wealthier areas where they're not needed as much. And then the fourth thing is how quickly you get, an advanced life trained person to the patient, which is our bit specifically. And as Gavin has said, the time that we get to those patients will be one of the measures. We know that we need to get there between 6 and 8 minutes, and we will be measuring that, and that will be one of that suite of measures. Chair, I was just going to mention as well a couple of things. One was really pleased to see the reductions in handover lost hours across Wales. We've seen the lowest month for 4 years was in June, and July is looking even stronger. So a kind of a big thank you for all the work that colleagues are doing across the system on that. And then the other thing I was just going to mention, if I could, is that actually we've been working with Ross and Gavin and Welsh Government colleagues on the rest of the ambulance performance framework, and we've had agreement from the Cabinet Secretary that the rest of the system of how we measure ambulance performance is also going to be changing later in this year. So in due course, clearly we'll bring that to you. So the traditional amber and green categories, they'll be changing as well, and the way in which we focus on clinical outcomes for those will also be important. So that's good news and good progress on that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Nicola.
Yeah, just 2 points. One is around the NET service, and I know there's a lot of work going on around the capacity, but we don't talk about a lot, and we've had significant impact. I think since April, the middle of June, we had lost 600 outpatient appointments through transport cancellations. We picked this up with WAS. I know there's a lot of work ratios there around, and I think AB accounts for 40% of all cancellations, so we're having a disproportionate impact. So it's something we're working on, but again, as a commissioner. And then I suppose linked to that is, there's so much information in the performance pack that is quite limited on ambulance unless you go into so what are the 5-10 key metrics that as a committee we want to see that we kind of got planned for versus how we're doing against it, covering both that kind of emergency transport and some of those other elements such as non-emergency that we kind of going to rely on in terms of priorities, because otherwise you can get lost in the data because there's so much there.
I think that's something I know that some of the lay members want to tease out when we get to the performance report is it's quite difficult to see the wood from the trees. So what are the key issues that should be where we need to collectively seeking further assurance? So we'll capture that and bring that back up at that point in time, if that's okay. In terms of NEPs, we did have a conversation at our last JCC meeting. So in terms of, again, I guess the question for us is, are we commissioning appropriately for the NEP service? If not, what action is being taken to try and address that?
Jay, do you want me to go into them now?
Sure.
Yeah. So there's a few opportunities that we discussed in CCLG. With the Ministerial Advisory Group recommendation about virtual outpatient appointments around follow-up, patient-initiated follow-ups, because we know we have a lot of patients who we are taking to outpatient appointments who may not necessarily have that. So helpful colleagues are going to take that away and work on that there. Focus on own transport first for patients. So there can be patients who have been conveyed that may have been able to make their own way to hospital for their outpatient appointments. So working with health boards to encourage the use of that. There's a lot of system efficiencies we can gain. So there's 70,000 same-day cancellations a year that we're having. So we need to align our systems a bit better. That could be hospitals who cancel appointments, patients haven't told the transport service until they turn up. That could be patients who rearrange their transport service, but they haven't told the provider. So there's a number of things there. WAST are undertaking a roster review currently, looking to unlock more capacity within existing resource within NEP. So that will give us some additional capacity in the system to the same extent. But there's still more to do there. We did broach the conversation around reducing the quality of the service. So at the moment, we try and prioritise patients getting to appointment times on time rather than just getting them there and picking them up, where patients will face a longer wait. We made such good gains on that. We were really hesitant to reduce the quality of the service to improve the numbers of patients conveyed because of the inefficiency in the system. So via the NEPS DAG, we will be pushing the system efficiencies with helpful colleagues.
So in terms of those actions, and then you think about how we then monitor and measuring the impact of those actions, that would be, again, it goes back to Nicola's point earlier, how is that then being reported to us in terms of reporting? So that's something to take away. Stacey.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as part of the foundation plan this year, we've got 2 strategic priorities around the ambulance model and then around the contracting and benchmarking of the service. So Ross and I are in discussions about actually pulling together that as one strategic priority in relation to the active commission of the ambulance service. What performance measures do we need to be measuring? And then how does that look and compare against other organisations? Our initial thinking at the moment is that we need to use some of our capacity in a little bit more agile way, probably bring somebody in externally to try and help us with some of that work. So just to say that it is ongoing, and yeah, you're right, the performance report needs a lot of work. So we do need to, I need to bring back a time scale on that really, but we can pick that up a little bit later.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. Paul,
yeah, it'll be quick. Just to echo that discussion on performance measures, because you talked, Rachel, about the fact that the process might mean we're getting more data, and that's to be welcome. But there's a need for us to hone in on those absolute key metrics that we need. It's second question, just there's a point about the digital front end and the need to update that as well. I'm wondering what potential risk there is in the digital front end as it stands. I don't know whether that's Gavin or Rachel who wants to pick that up.
Gavin, yeah, happy to come in, Jane. So at the moment, the risk is that it's out of date, so as in clinical, the clinical criteria has moved on. We've got a solution for that now, so it's in train and will be addressed by winter. But Rachel may have more operational detail on it. Rachel.
I was just going to say, I mean, not to go into the detail now, but Paul, we do have a corporate risk within the ambulance service on that issue. So happy to share that with, Gavin and colleagues, just to make sure that you're cited on how we've articulated that and the mitigations that we're taking.
Thanks.
Let's. I think there's I can't quite articulate what the action is, but there's a NEPS action that we need to be thinking in terms of how as a committee we're cited on the performance issues with NEPS, and whether that's in the performance report or separately. But let's take that as an action today and then bring that back to the next meeting in terms of some kind of a solution to that and a recommended way forward. Apart from that, can we note the reports? Thank you. Moving on to specialist commissioning again. Now, assume we've read the report.
Yeah, so just wanting to pull out the good news that the Cardiff and Vale thrombectomy service commenced on the 1st of July, offering a service from 8 until 3, Monday to Friday. This is part of a plan to move to 24/7 thrombectomy going forward for South Wales. We're working on the models of care, what that looks like, working with stroke clinicians and the stroke networks in order to be able to embed that. And, obviously bearing in mind the anecdote or the story that Liam told us earlier about the ambulance patient being taken to North Bristol Trust for a stroke rather than waiting for an ambulance. So very mindful that that's front and centre at the moment. Just picking up on plastic surgery. Plastics was the only service that was out of our commission services that was out at 104 weeks at the tail end of last year. So to note that Swansea Bay have secured some planned care funding in order to be able to maintain those weights under 104 weeks. At the beginning of this year, we know that there'll still be pressures on the service going forward. However, we do have a programme of plastics work. A previous decision from WISC Joint Committee was that, in line with England, that plastic surgery isn't designated as specialised anymore in England, and would we seek to transfer the commissioning responsibility for those services back to health boards that programme is stalled because of the complexity of trying to keep a little bit as highly specialised. So I'll start to bring some reports and papers through our governance structures, and that'll come through CCLG and through to joint committee, because we'll need to make a decision on whether we proceed with the decision that was previously made. And also to note that from a North Wales perspective, there's a task and finish group with the provider and with Betsy Cadwallader looking at making sure that specialised plastics activity is flowing through that, and things that should be done in secondary care are done in secondary care. And then to note, obviously, we had a new risk around CAR-T and its JC accreditation, JACIE, working closely with Cardiff on the mitigations for that. We've got 3 different risks associated with that. Having looked at some of the pathway work and the capacity for CAR-T, we're going to downgrade the commissioner risk for capacity for CAR-T, because we believe that we could secure capacity from English providers, notwithstanding that there is a benefit to patients being treated closer to home. I understand that the business case for the capital improvements has been submitted by Cardiff to Welsh Government and waiting on the outcome of that. So if the accreditation is not awarded, we won't be able to do CAR-T anymore in Cardiff, because the providers will provide the substance, the materials required. We could make a pragmatic decision on BMT as to whether we put the service into escalation and ran that in a non-accredited centre. We'll bring that forward as a risk and a decision at the appropriate time. The numbers for BMT are considerably higher than CAR-T. So BMT, we are talking about around 160 a year, as opposed to 15 for CAR-T at the moment.
My understanding, there's no issue in terms of concern about quality.
No.
Issue about the asset facilities.
Yeah, so it's the facilities that are not good for the delivery of services in general. So sorry, yeah, that's articulated in the report, and that's why we could consider taking a pragmatic decision on BMT, because the outcomes are in line with what we would expect for the service.
It needs to do that anyway, because once the capital case is approved, it's going to take some time for that to then be put into place, isn't it? So that's a decision we'll need to take. But obviously, it's, with the assurance that a capital case has been approved, that provides us with a great degree of assurance.
And it's whether JC are assured as well and continue the accreditation. So, they may maintain the accreditation if the works are assured, but they've been given guarantees in the past. So I think they'd like to see some commencement of some works.
Understood. Suzanne.
Sorry, just checking my mic. Just to give some, well, I suppose a little bit of. So the business case originally was submitted to Welsh Government back in, I think, 2018 or 19. It has been modified over time, which actually reduces some of the specification and will constrain capacity. So whether or not it will actually be future-proofed is debatable, I think. And so I don't have a sense of how likely that case is to be approved, but I think that is a significant risk that this is the 3rd visit of the JC accreditation where they will find very little has changed in terms of the concerns they raised. So I do think the risk of non-accreditation is quite high. And I think in all of this, and it is mentioned in the papers, I think, the kind of implications on our other activities in terms of the advanced therapies work and so on, it will have a significant detrimental impact if we lose JC accreditation. So, how we handle that going forward, as Mel has described, I think is something for us to consider. But it would likely result in a wider volume of patients having to have service and care commissioned from elsewhere, whether that be where England or wherever. So there will be a risk to the JCC's overall commissioning position, I would imagine.
So Mel, I presume you're live to that.
Yep, and I think you asked where those centres were in England, in London, and in Birmingham for South Wales. patients that would be impacted by this, and for BMT potentially Bath.
Thank you. I mean, as Suzanne said, this is not necessarily a new issue. It's been around for a while, but it's only just on our risk register, isn't it? So 2 months before the inspection, I suppose, you know, do we have to consider as a JCC that any derogation here, given that the specification we've got in place is not fully met, or will be that the outcomes are being met, and suggest we could do this more detailed risk assessment to keep our eye on this a bit closely.
I wonder whether there was a conversation that needs to go to Quality and Safety Committee in terms of just thinking about the mitigations that you have in place, and just to make sure that they're fully cited on those.
I just think by default, the service in Swansea Bay, you know, we're affected by this as well, aren't we?
So I believe now, Karen, if I'm right, there's a Swansea Bay impact to the JC accreditation in Cardiff as well. So there'll be a South Wales.
By default, we're not
by default, yeah. And the other thing is that we have got a service specification, so Yana might want to come in and
I think it's just to say that in a way we need to look at them separately. I think the CAR-T therapies, the manufacturer stipulates has to be, we have no choice there. But from a bone marrow transplant, I am not sure that NHSE, you know, we're looking at 135 patients. I'm not sure that NHSE would have the capacity, and it may be that JCC needs to make a decision on, and given that the bone marrow transplant service in Cardiff, that even despite everything is still doing better than average. I think there are mitigating factors there.
And I think that's where that's about then, again, we need obviously your advice and clinical advice and from clinicians in Cardiff and Vale as well, in terms of, again, it goes back to what our level of risk is, which we're having a conversation about earlier on. Let's, then we'll move on to a different issue.
Hi, thank you for that. Ian, I think this is what you just said. If there's a risk of people travelling further to get this treatment, and there's a risk of people having treatment I think this is what you just said. What is the balance of those risks? I mean, is it better to let them have it, even if whatever? I mean, it's silly to make people do something more risky just to tick a box somewhere. I know it isn't.
And I think there's exactly the conversation,
And certainly for the autologous bone marrow transplants, where there's no concerns over Swansea, to be sending people away the risk seems inappropriate.
Suzanne.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the other thing we have to consider is, should we agree a derogation? We have to be open and honest and transparent with patients about this. So there are reputational and communication risks with our patients, because this is risky treatment in and of itself. And then we have to have a conversation with them that says, you need to understand that whilst our outcomes are good and we can share data and information, we have to be clear that under normal circumstances, they would be receiving this treatment in a UK context in a JC accredited unit. And I think we have to be really, duty of candour applies here in that regard, as they're making their clinical decision, as they're making their own decisions about where they want to access treatment. And I think we'll have to provide for that in supporting the decision-making process.
Thanks. So in terms of next steps on this, what are the next steps?
So we're working really closely with Cardiff. We've got our next meeting with Cardiff on the 7th of August, looking at the proximity of the risks, etc. We'll bring a paper through as taken action to bring a paper through to the next QSOC committee, and we'll continue to monitor. Team are working on pathways for CAR-T into English centres, and then we can have that conversation about the balance of risk.
Likely to have something come back to the September JCC meeting.
Yeah, so in terms of papers, we probably won't have an outcome in the papers, but we'll be able to give a verbal update, so we'll know by the date.
We'll put it into the action log and we can provide an update for the action log. Okay. Anything else? Can we move on to, sorry, Stacey?
So just one thing to add to Mel's report. So the thrombectomy service, really good news, and will have a significant benefit if we can expect that service up and running. Just to say that financially that does present us with a risk of quite a substantial amount this year, due to us having to manage the Bristol service and the transition into the Cardiff service. So I just wanted to highlight that with you.
Sure. Thank you very much. We'll come on to that in a moment. Mental health. Sorry, Jack.
only two small issues. Yeah. Whilst it still remains a risk, recognise the good work on plastic sewage. That's great. Two things that I have a slight niggle about. One is about Salford and obesity, and I recognise the difficulties they have, but a bit concerned that that's drifting on a little bit, and also recognise that TAVI is still there as quite a big potential risk for us as well, really.
Yeah, so Salford, in terms of the obesity surgery, we have reached out to their main commissioner, which is Greater Manchester Integrated Commissioning Board. So we're waiting to hear back from them to piggyback on some of the activities that they're doing. We're right again to Salford, potentially from Kew this time, and try and get some traction on that escalation. In the meantime, there is no concern about outcomes. It's weights, but obviously the associated harms for the longer weights, and no action plan in order to manage the weights. I think we'll probably come on to TAVI when we talk about some of the financial risk a little bit later. So we'll do that later if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Adrian, report again. Anything you wish to highlight?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll take it as being read by everyone. The issue of the care home framework, I just wanted to discuss that quickly. The old NCCU developed and managed two national frameworks, one for hospitals, one for care homes. And we had a clinical team who managed those two frameworks. There are changes to procurement regulations and law, which means that the framework will have to be different because local authorities are not able to commission through it any longer solely, because the new procurement regimes are for health funded services only. So local authorities are obviously disappointed with that. Health boards, we do need sign off for the new framework. They've been reluctant to give us approval because they feel that there is a resource implication because the new procurement process there's some additional administration work to do to place patients. Now, this isn't just for framework, this is for all health funding, older persons, care homes, etc. So I think there's work that local procurement teams need to do as well with their own commissioning teams. The new framework will actually reduce that burden on local commissioning teams, but we need to work with them for that. So one health board, how will have approved the new framework? And we're waiting for the other health boards to approve or not. If they don't approve, then obviously they don't have to use a framework, they can commission services, whichever way they wish. So there are still some concerns from a health board perspective around that we are working closely with them and working closely with providers as to a way forward. So the new framework next year will be, whereas it's a quality rating from the JCC at the moment, our clinical teams won't be involved now anymore. Care Inspectorate Wales have got a new rating process for care homes, so that will be the way that commissioning teams can see the quality of particular services that they want to place residents in. So I just want to update that really and see if there's any questions around that.
Thanks, Adrian. And in terms of timescales that you need in terms of getting those approvals from health board colleagues.
It was for last Friday. we have met with them again this week, so they've gone away to have more discussions. Swansea Bay did actually approve as well, but they withdrew their consent after we met with them on Tuesday because they had more questions. So the longer it goes on, the harder it is. We've got a new framework in place by next April, so we've got to write to commissioner, etc.
So let's take as an action then an update on that to the next meeting. And to just make sure if that needs to be, and that no doubt if that needs to be escalated between now and the next meeting, it's helped done. Paul.
Yeah, so just on that then, who's being liaised within the health boards about that? Is that the mental health leads in each health board or the continuing care leads? Who do I need to go and have a conversation?
It's the continuing healthcare leads. I have spoken in the mental health, the first mental health family commissioner group that I held last month. We had a discussion there to say that this was coming. We have met with the mental health commissioning teams or CHC commissioning teams numerous times over the last 6-7 months. So we've had discussions around it. So we have an intelligence sharing and commissioning meeting. It used to be quarterly. We've made it monthly now because of this issue.
Right. Okay. So I think it's probably worth just highlighting it to the directors of planning and maybe the directors of finance in each organisation, because I know, having had a chat internally in my place, I think some of the concerns maybe come from finance colleagues as well. So it might just be worth making sure that they are aware of it, because, and I'll go back and have a chat in my own organisation. But I think in terms of escalating, I suggest you escalate to directors of planning and directors of finance to say, could they liaise with their continuing care leads and give a confirmed position for each health board.
Okay, yeah, will do. Thank you, Paul.
I think that's the same issue here. I think our mental health director wasn't aware it had come down. So we haven't fed stuff back appropriately via the mental health fund group, and that's our fault. But I don't think when going at the wrong level, maybe we'll get the right people involved.
So as an escalation pathway is emerging, let's make sure that we are then concluding this hopefully at the next meeting in terms of concluded action. Any other questions or issues for Adrian? No, thank you. No reports. We now have a break. Let's come back at 20 past 11, so 15-minute break. Sorry, Hayley.
Oh, apologies. I just wondered about the update around the impact on medium secure Caswell, the issue in the paper. The last time we met, I know there were detailed discussions taking place. So I just wondered if there was an update, Adrian. Thanks.
Yeah, certainly. Stacey and I met with Swansea Bay last week, Swansea Bay Health Board, around not just around the fire issue, but general occupancy and medium secure. So they're still waiting for the repair work to start. It has gone out to tender. I think they've identified a provider to undertake the work. I think there's some issues between Swansea Bay and Cwmtaf because there's staff from one building and the environment is from another health board. So they're looking at those issues as well. I did give them other options for patients in low secure beds, whether that's using independent sector beds or whether the JCC use independent sector beds for additional medium secure on a block contact sector. So I've given them a number of options to consider. They're going to come back to us with any alternatives that they can think of or any preferred options for the fire bit. There's also the longer term issue on occupancy, not just Caswell, but T. Llewellyn in North Wales as well, because they're probably both running at around 75-80% occupancy, and we've got 40 odd patients in medium secure in the independent sector, which obviously can't go on. So I've given them some options around local, medium secure, independent providers, maybe taking the more challenging patients for admission, as long as they can step down patients who are settled in their service back to Caswell or T. Llewellyn, but still need medium secure. So I'm going to link the independent sector up with the two units to discuss the process for that, really, whilst we look at the environments in T. Llewellyn and Caswell, around the extra care areas and the funding for those. So there's shorter term and longer term options for both sites, really.
We may want to have a conversation about in terms of the finance update as well, because we may need to be a bit more robust, I think, in terms of what needs to happen rather than options.
Yeah, so we've agreed with Darren that we'll have a 3-stage plan, which is what was the sort of exceptional bit at the start in relation to the fire, what's the transition bit, and then what's the long-term plan in terms of future commissioning. That's going to take us 20 months probably to get to full end stage commissioning. So we've asked Swansea Bay to come with a plan to CCLG in August that clearly describes what that looks like from a patient perspective. And we are working with the finance team to ensure that the contract revision is also up to date. So we're having the same conversations up in North Wales. So we want to move away from the current contracting arrangements that we've got up in North Wales and to incentivise repatriation of patients out of area. So it's a 2-pronged approach, and it is truly an all Wales medium secure sort of commissioning collectively, really.
Yeah, it was just I suppose we wasn't going to necessarily pick it up here, but it is having an impact on, I know I've escalated some cases. So, you know, we've got an issue where we want patients to come back from needing to go back to the health board and we give them a certain amount of time, but we've got patients who've been stuck in our PICU and, you know, it's affected our income and admissions. So it does have a knock-on effect to the system. And again, I suppose we pick it up under performance, but how do we make this really visible and transparent and not just pick up and understand the impact it is having, and I'm doing everything that's is causing some real pressure at our local service.
So one of the things that we've asked them to do is to review the patient. So we're going to do an independent assessment of the independent cases outside of area, but also they're doing that as part of the case management review. I suppose what they're not doing is picking up some of those health board cases. So
no, well, yeah, I know the patient honest. The case manager have picked that, but it is the available. It's a learning disability beds which couldn't go to Caswell anyway, but there's no independent sector beds either, so they are.
Yeah, so we'll pull that in. I think
It's about being aware, you know, when we're talking risks, we've got like 2 months delays of patients. So there's then a bit of an unseen risk, which is not only affecting the suitability of that patient of where they're at, but the ones coming in. But it's just
some long stands as well that, you know.
Yeah, you know, the case managers will review the patients in Caswell and Llywelyn in the same way as they do the the independent sector. So that'll be a new sort of process. But also there is, you know, longer to our foundation plan this year is to look at exclusion criteria in the units, because we should have inclusion criteria for people with ASD, people with learning disabilities, etc. We haven't, and there's lack of services in Wales. So they end up going to services in England if there's a bed available, or stuck in inappropriate environments like patient and AB. So that is a longer term process we should be looking at over the coming year.
Right, let's pick this up in the finance report later on, but it sounds like there's some more. We need to be clear in terms of the full impact of this particular issue and situation. So we're just thinking and stepping back and looking at that in the round. We've got to have a break now, back in 10 minutes, so it's just gone 20 past.
Then I know what said. Now I'm like after 20.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. For colleagues who are in the room, it's getting rather warm, and so we have opened the door. If it becomes a bit too noisy, we'll have to shut that again. But it's getting rather warm. You might decide you want to take your tie off. So
nations will fall.
Let's move on to item 3, section 3, 3.1, the emergency judicial review judgment. Then Gavin, we've been approved.
Thank you, Chair. So committee members will be aware of the judicial review regarding the decision making taken by Joint Committee in April 2024 regarding the emergency service. Members will recall the 4 grounds being challenged during the judicial review process. The details in the paper for colleagues to take down. So the judgment was handed down on the 19th of June 2025 on ground 1 and 2, which was irrationality and the breach of the plain principle. The court found that the recommendations were sufficiently distinct, with no requirement to finalise every detail before proceeding. In respect to ground 4 consultation issues, the court refused permission to proceed on the basis that, considering the entire engagement process, public and stakeholder views were sufficiently taken into account and the legal requirements for consultation were met. In respect to ground 5, Equality Act breaches, the court found that multiple equality impact assessments were undertaken, with the potential impacts considered and weighed against the benefits of the unmet need. So in terms of next steps, the claimant has submitted an application for permission to appeal. It's been responded to by the legal counsel for the defendants. The JCC will consider fully the outcome of the judicial review, and we await the outcome regarding the appeals process. It should just be noted that should an appeal be granted, there would be further legal costs funded by the health boards, and there remains a risk of a protracted, prolonged appeals process. Joint committee members will need to consider a clear approach to managing this risk to ensure that the operational delivery continues and implementation progresses as planned with the ongoing support of the Wales Air Ambulance charity. Committee members are asked to note the content of that report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And then again, there is still an appeal pending. Well, there's the consideration of appeal. So I think we would be just reflecting on that in our comments and observations today. Obviously, I think we can be clear in terms of the original judgment was very clear that the process that we followed was a fair and robust process, and is not open to from the judge, his view, not open to judicial challenge, and that's obviously pleasing to note. I guess the thing we just need to be conscious of as well. This has been brought by a passionate group of individuals who have expressed their concern, which they have every right to do so. And it's part of the responsibility that we have being collectively on behalf of the health boards of being publicly accountable, that we're open for judicial review, and that process has been allowed to take its course. I think that there is maybe a more robust approach that we wish to take, having reviewed the robustness of the judge's decision about if this does go to appeal in terms of the balance in terms of costs that the health boards may need to bear in relation to that appeal, which seems based upon the very robust approach within the judge's decision, not particularly just, but that's something we can consider once we're clear about that. But I wouldn't want anyway, as because we've been successful in the judicial review, to anyway to consider that that there was not the right of the individuals to bring the case to judicial review. It's entirely appropriate they use the avenues open to them. Any comments or questions for anybody? Susan.
Just a question through you, Chair. Gavin, we spoke a considerable while ago in terms of the impact that it's having on the charity and their ability to raise funds. So I just wondered how things are now going into the future.
I personally haven't spoken to the charity recently. I know Ross is in regular dialogue, but I'm more than happy to take that away. It was having an impact on them, but it'd be interesting to see whether that's changed.
Any other points? We are going to have a bit of a debrief in terms of is there any, in terms of the process and any lessons learned at the development session in August? But this is just to formally record the fact that the outcome of the additional review is now known and it's been received by the Joint Commissioning Committee. And they're grateful to a huge amount of work that has gone in to staff, obviously the organisation responding to the judicial review, particularly Ross and Gwennon when she was here in terms of getting that across the line. So again, just want to pay tribute to those who saw that. Thanks in our minutes. Great, thank you very much. Then we move on to item 4, which is around the delivery of the plan. And Stacey, over to you in terms of financial forecast and risks. Again, just in terms of content, we are going to have an in-camera conversation about this as well.
Thanks, Chair. So just to present a high-level report based on our month 3 financial position. You know, the formal report on the money financial report is based on month 2 for this month. So the report that we present now on the financial risks is in relation to our draft month 3 position. Since then, we have finalised and sent off to Welsh Government, but at the time of publishing the papers, it was still in draft. So hence the narrative in the report itself. It was an important report really to bring to the committee today, just to bring up to date members up to date on where we currently are on our financial plan. So members will note that we had some extensive conversations in getting our financial plan to an approvable position at the end of March last financial year. That included a 1.77% uplift, that included a 2% efficiency target, and Welsh Government income assumptions in relation to the CUF uplift in England. In adopting the risk-based approach, members will also remember that we reduced the financial plan from the 6% to the 4%, and to set the challenge that we need to manage within the resources that were deemed approvable at the time. So that inherently gave us a 2% efficiency to deliver on this year. So we took the decision at month 3 that we would start to report an overspend of 3.7 million, and it was really important for us today to just make members aware of the further risks that are upon us in trying to manage the position this year. They are not light, they are £16.6 million across all of Wales. And it is worth noting at this point that that falls differentially across the 7 health boards as a result of the risk sharing that does impact on some health boards more than others, namely up in North Wales and Powys, because the majority of this risk is in relation to the money that Welsh Government allocated to us last year for NHS England activity, that this year they have told us that they haven't got or will not be funding, and in addition the changes to the tariff. So I'll come on to that in just a second. Just to highlight some of the changes this month and why we decided to push out the deficit. So the Welsh providers, namely Cardiff, we did see a significant overspend in some of their key cost growth areas, and some in which we thought there was sort of robust or very little options to manage going forward, and that being in NICE approvals, but also in some high cost service areas such as TAVI, where there is clinically urgent requirements. In England, there was a small overspend, and it is worth noting that the activity and monitoring data in England is not quite where it needs to be, but we are perceiving that we could probably manage that, other than the savings target that we need to deliver against the referral management of the 9 million as a result of that loss of income this year. But more importantly, and this is noted as IPFR, but it's not just IPFR, is the prior approval process and some of the contract spend that we do on an individual patient basis. It's significantly overperforming in relation to HPN, so home parental nutrition, some ERT, which is enzyme replacement therapy, and again those NICE approvals. And you remember from the 6% to the 4%, we took out a significant proportion of planned spend in relation to NICE approvals. These are currently being offset by two key areas. Mental health, not only have we delivered the £1 million target that we inherently had included within the plan, but we've used £4.4 million of our reserves for delaying some of our ongoing development spend or committed reserves to allow us to mitigate that back down to the year end. So at the highest level, that's where we are in year. Moving on to the net risks, I think what's really important is that we have a conversation later about how we mitigate some of these net risks, because they're currently showing in the position as non-delivery of savings. In reality, they're showing as non-delivery of savings because of sort of the Welsh Government income position this year that was available to us last year. They are detailed there. So what are we doing about it? So we have secured some significant savings, and there are some options that we can discuss a little bit later on. But we have renegotiated our mental health high secure contracts, and we have also renegotiated some of our NHS England contracts. That collectively has brought down around £2.5 million, or delivered the £2.5 million savings target that we said we would. We think there's still more to go on some of that, albeit there is some cost pressures that we need to manage too. And we can come into detail a bit later on some of those. Other areas that we're reducing our exposure in will be the medium secure contracts and the recommissioning of the capacity in both our Welsh centres, our delayed transfers of care. We think there is an option around intestinal failure bed reduction, and in particular the relationship between that and home parenting nutrition. I think we need to think about that in terms of what that means for community nursing, and there may be some nuances around. I mean, we talked earlier about how we can utilise our Welsh ambulance space. So there's some initiatives around some of these programmes that we can talk about later on. Biosimilar meds management programme. So we are now inherently included now with all of our contract documentation with all of our providers. We are monitoring that really actively this year, and we have also extended blue tech in relation to some of that criteria. And we have had ongoing contracting discussions with NHS Wales provider contracts. They have now changed in context due to the nature by which we're having conversations with Welsh Government and the need to sign our LTAs by Friday of last week. And so we have had to slightly pivot on some of those negotiations this year, which have meant greater exposure for us as commissioners going forward. And I don't want to exclude that also Welsh Ambulance Service are also delivering £8.5 million worth of savings that's inherent within their own position at the moment. In terms of our strategic key priorities, we have had some exec level discussions in relation to some of those big service changes. But again, I think we need to just come back to that in the August development session to make sure that the detail of those scopes are shared and collectively agreed with JCC, given the timeliness and the test delivery over the next couple of months. So in conclusion, just to note at this point that the forecast deficit for month 3 will be a £3.7 million overspend for the first quarter, with additional risks identified of £16.6 million.
Thanks very much. And again, we'll have a broad conversation about this a little bit later on in the next part of our meeting. And again, I perhaps this will go into a bit more detail in terms of some of the areas that you may want to explore, which perhaps haven't been fully formed yet, which we want to have those conversations about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think obviously it's important that we've highlighted these now, are aware of these pressures now, right, and so that we have a better opportunity to take remedial action after the first quarter rather than September. So I guess the question for me is, whilst it may well be something important that the committee has cited on taking action, that I wouldn't want the fact that it's not a committee meeting to stop you taking action that might be necessary in order to mitigate the position. And again, we may just want to test again what the levels of risks are with the committee around that approach a little bit later on. Or anything you wish to add as chair of the Finance Committee?
Yeah, just really helpful report. Thank you for that. It's we always knew that this was going to be financially quite a challenging year, and the plan was on the basis of that 4%, and that was always going to be tough. I think we recognise some of the challenges around that. But to echo also what Ian says, if there's stuff that needs to be done, ahead of board, that I think as a committee we would be supportive of that. Pace and rigour is important. So I'm conscious of the fact that we're looking at figures for month 2 effectively, but we're already quite well into the financial year. But it's tough. I'm also very conscious also of the fact that things like referral management is quite labour intensive, and we're still below sort of full staff. So it's what we talked about in terms of challenging between national things we're picking up and what's in our foundation plan as well. So recognise the challenge, not just financially, but in terms of the staffing we've got to support it. So I suppose a mixture of emotions, really. Welcome the honesty and the directness of our reporting, but I think we're all quite concerned about the risks that we're carrying as well.
I guess just as a statement back as chair to the committee and to colleagues is, we approved a plan 3 months ago. We need to be in a position to deliver the plan. And that will require mitigations to take place. I understand that. That's why we need to be quickly cited on those mitigations. But the option of not delivering there's not an option in not delivering the plan. I think that's a really important message. I'd be keen that we make today. So not only in terms of our responsibilities on behalf of the health board, but also the health board colleagues as well. That's really important. Nia.
Sorry to say, certainly those concerns have been reflected in subcommittee as well.
Yeah.
It's just the same thing, really. So let me get this right. This is an overspend just on the things we've already agreed to do, not the extra things that we were talking about earlier that were on the horizon, or at least things that we hadn't. I know they're not really extra. Is that right?
Is that right? Yeah, you're right. You're right, Nia.
Well, we've got to cut our coat according to our cloth, haven't we? We can't do more if we can't even do what we're supposed to do. I don't understand how we are proposing to do everything on the same amount of money.
So I think just appreciate how challenging it is, because it's being felt everywhere. All the health boards are facing significant challenges, but it is worth remembering. I got quite a lot of challenge at the board because we agreed 4%, which was way above our allocation. And I think I described we put millions into these services at the expense of putting money or having to find more savings locally, which is hugely challenging. So 4%, the context we agreed there was being realistic about the pressure on specialised services, and it had to be an upper limit. And in fact, the expectation is it needed to try to be less than our further savings. So I just want to reinforce that I think Stacey suggested there's areas of work, but the message is it has to be the upper limit. I think you'll put, Chair, 3 months in, there's already things going way off the potential. You need to check, should we have predicted some of those in terms of the learning, but we need to make sure this plan stays in balance. If not, goes underneath to support the All Wales position. The All Wales MEG position is the health boards is currently not affordable, and we need to continue we can't afford to add to it for this agenda. So I know we all know that. I just think it's really important to formally know that.
I think it's really important that's articulated, and that's I think that I'll bring Paul, then I'll bring Hugh in terms of sort of a Chief Commissioner's observations. Paul.
Thanks, Chair. So I was just going to make the point. I mean, Stacey's just highlighted, isn't it, one of the big drivers here is the resource we had last year from Welsh Government to fund the cross-border costs, and that isn't being replicated again this year. And there's something then about, well, how are we going to manage that process? Because in a way, it's an open-ended thing, isn't it? Because at the minute, if people go over the border, well, we have to pay the cost. So how are we going to manage that process of making sure that, to Nia's point, that we're cutting the cloth to fit the resources that we've got available, because that is going to mean difficult choices around how we fund, because we've got an inequitous situation, haven't we, where some providers are charging an uplift that is is higher than we're actually charging within Wales. So I suppose the question is there a more cost-effective way to care for those patients within Wales, or do we need to be putting some sort of demand management process in place for how we're allocating people to go to placements out over the bridge? Because if that's what's costing, 9 million quid last year that isn't funded this year, that's the place to start, I would have thought, because we just can't keep having this open-ended process where demand is just driving up the cost, because as Nicola said, we've all put allocations in to fund this year. We've got no more money to fund it, and Welsh Government have got any more money to fund it. So the only way we're going to contain this is by containing growth and demand. So I guess there's perhaps a question of how we do that moving forward.
I'm sure we'll come on to discuss that in a bit more detail a little bit later on, but I think you hit the nail on the head, Paul. But also I think there's probably some more conversations we ought to be having with Welsh Government as well, in terms of the shift in position from last year to this year. But that's perhaps another conversation to have. But
yeah, there's a lot in there, and some of the conversations we'll get onto later today. I think one of the key issues for us today is just want to be completely transparent in terms of what the position is. So we're at an early conversation. I think picking up the comments that Nicola, Paul and others making then, there is, the realism is this, we have to solve this. And actually that's the conversation that clearly we're having internally at the moment. We're not bringing this as a problem that actually is, we can expect just to go away. We have to actually take some tough decisions, I think, on this. And I think that's the conversation that we will have to develop quite quickly over the next month. I think we also need to be cognizant is there is actually quite a lot of savings already being achieved already in here. And I think often when you concentrate on overspends, deficits, you forget about what's been done. So we clearly wanted that to come across as well. I come in fresh, and I just feel there is still something which I can't reconcile. The fact that actually a lot more money has gone into the Welsh system this year, and yet there is a big chunk of this deficit relates to non-recurring funding that was given last year in recognition of a real problem with cross-border flows, but also a pricing issue with cross-border flows that was recognised by Welsh Government this year and seems to be not being recognised this year. So again, I think there's something as we conversations go forward today is actually, is that something we accept, or is it something we want to take back more formally now in terms of the recognition of the position, in terms of pushing that one once again?
Thank you. And let's make sure we pick that up a little bit later on. I think that's a very helpful assessment. My suggestion is that we acknowledge the position. There's some broader conversation we'll have a little bit later on today. We do have a Finance and Performance Committee in August. We do. And again, there's an opportunity there to consider in a bit more detail what comes out of the conversation we have today. But also, I hope a willingness on our behalf, subject to the conversation we have later, for executive colleagues to just start to introduce mitigations as quickly as possible in order to make sure that we have the best chance of recovering the position early on in the financial year, rather than having to wait until month 6 before we're in a position to take mitigating action. Are we happy to move on and then come back to this a bit later on? But thank you. In terms of monthly position, that already placed. So assume that item has also been covered. Thanks. Great. Moving on then to the JCC combined reports. Stacey.
So
you've touched upon this already.
This is the performance report that needs work, and I appreciate that. And I have to take responsibility for that. I do need to create some capacity to be able to get some of this done. And I have had conversations with Hugh about probably getting some support to be able to do that. So the report that you've got in front of you is month 2, but a lot of the data is still only based on month 1. There was an issue with some of the data downloads this month and so on and so forth. And so it's been a combination of errors in effect. That means you've got a month 2 report that should actually be a month 3 report. So I was going to suggest that I develop the month 3 report for quarter 1 by the end of this month, and then share it with members at the end of this month, so that you've got an up-to-date position. Just in terms of highlights, so Mel has already picked up a couple in terms of specialised services. treatment areas that worry me, I suppose, from a Welsh perspective and an English perspective, is in neurosurgery, plastics and bariatrics that are creeping out in terms of performance. And also acknowledging that whilst health boards are working towards increased activity around outpatients and delivering the targets around that area, then obviously I am anticipating a bow wave later on in the year in terms of activity that I'm just trying to model through now. In terms of Welsh Ambulance Service, the other thing to note that we've already picked up is the improved trajectory on handover delays. And if that continues, then that is a very, very, very good piece of work. And I know Rachel's on the call today, but there does need to be probably ongoing conversations around the performance monitoring and what we do about some of that improvement trajectory in terms of capacity release and so on and so forth going forward. So probably one that we'll take into CCLG and that we will pick up from Ross's collaborative commissioning group that I'm going to forget the name of now, but Ross's group that he has with health boards and the ambulance service collectively. From an organisation perspective, so it's pleasing to see that our sickness rates are slowly going down and that Hugh is putting a huge push around PADRs. So just to say that whilst the PADR rate doesn't look great this month, there's a huge push around making sure that we deliver and achieve those over the next couple of weeks. I don't know if there's anything else that I wanted to pick up. I noted your comments earlier on about measurement targets, and I wonder whether we tag that onto the August development session, particularly around the ambulance perspective, just to make sure that we're commissioning what the committee wants us to commission and monitoring the performance targets alike.
So in terms of the report we've got in front of us, thank you very much, Stacey, for pulling out some of the key issues and highlights. Again, I'm conscious that this is not right.
Yeah.
And I guess again the question for me is in terms of timescales for you to be in a position of you being assured and confident you're bringing something to us that you're comfortable is capturing the things that are concerning you and your colleagues. Do you have an idea of?
Yeah, so I am seeking some support from other organisations that do it really well. So I mean, what I'd suggest was Paul and I were going to pick up a conversation as part of the PPF agenda. And maybe if I agree with Paul through that committee, a timescale, Nia also had some feedback in terms of the presentation of the report. So if I do a little bit of scoping over the next couple of weeks and come back with a timescale around what that could look like. Is that okay?
What worries me at the moment is I'm worried that I'm missing something, and I don't know what I might be missing because of the level of detail and the and also the you just done it very helpful in pulling out for us what the key issues are, but that didn't come across clearly within the performance report.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'd say is all of the areas that are brought up as performance issues are picked up in the Commissioner's report. Yeah, address the Commissioner report. So it's just really, there should be a corporate report that we need to develop, and you know, I have to take responsibility for that. So I'll do that over the next couple of weeks and come back with a timeline.
Yeah, I'm very happy. Yes, Stacey, I have had some useful discussions. I'm conscious of the fact, and it goes back to what you said earlier, Nicola. It's about having those key indicators that we can look at, and the individual commissioning reports are really useful in terms of the granularity. But it's helpful to have a performance report that you're able to look at those key indicators that really should be attracting our attention as well. And there's lots of good stuff in there. We have to work really hard to get at it as well. So it's trying to find that balance. And even though I'm a complete performance nerd and I'm quite happy to look at big reports, I still found it quite hard going. And it's exactly down to what you say, and it's the danger of missing something amongst that wealth of detail as well. So yeah, happy to do that, but I'm happy to do that as fast as you're able to as well.
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you for changing the scorecard, the way the scorecard has been presented. I think it's clearer. It looks very red, but it's certainly clearer, I think, than it was, in my opinion.
Rachel?
Yeah, it was just really an offer, Chair, to say that, you know, clearly within WAST, we do a lot of work on key performance indicators for our board, which covers the range of NEPTs, 111 and ambulance services. Conscious of your capacity that you talked about earlier, you know, I've certainly spoken to Ross about how we can, you know, if we can share the work that we do so that we're not kind of repeating and duplicating work between our information teams. More than happy to help where we can on that.
The less duplication required, the better. And I think that's a really good offer.
I think there's something going forward in terms of the committees, in terms of what information do we need to make decisions, what information do we need to be aware of risk and take mitigations. And yeah, I'm hoping that most information is in here, but it's the skill that we're going to have to develop is actually how we bring that to our higher level. And as Rachel just says, you know, we've already sort of had conversations in terms of, well, what are the key ambulance, rather than, I think historically, targets got set, more targets got set, more targets got set, different, yeah, and it's just, and what we've done is never drop what we've had, and we just keep building on it. And we've had 3 organisations develop over a number of years. We got so much data, but it's turning that into information now.
It's a so what.
Yeah.
So all this data. So what's it saying to us? And the issue is then for us, both in terms of us receiving assurance, but also helping us in our decision making and our commissioning intentions. That's really key.
I agree, Chair. We commented on this during the IMTP process. You look at the planning guidance for NHS Wales, and there's about 3 or 4 separate documents, all with a series of indicators. I remember when we set up the first performance framework in Paris, there were 24 key indicators, and we've just got an enormous suite of them at the moment. And that's not necessarily our call, it's just circumstance, but we need to be very sharp about, as you say, Hugh, what are our risks? What are the things we need to pay attention to?
Thank you, Nicola, then Nia.
Yeah, it was just, I suppose, going back to the risk register conversation as well, is where we've got some of our highest risks. How does the performance headlines be talking about?
Yeah,
What's our biggest risks? Although I also then like to understand all the things we're not doing so about. What are the headlines where we've done particularly well? And I know we'll all have different versions, but we've got a bit of a quadrant in our front page, which is what we're most concerned about. You know, what's gone well during the period, what's coming next, so that you could just read that front page. But then we've got a set of key metrics that align to our risk register. I think that would, you know, we've got now big catastrophic ambulance response times, so you'd expect that to be in a top pack. So I think a link to risk would be helpful as well.
Oh, so Nia.
Yes, I was just thinking, it just occurred to me that we're saying that we've got this incredibly complex and report, which has been taken a massive amount of work. I can see that, and contains a lot of information, but we're finding it difficult to tease out the really important things. And we're also saying that we've got this overspend that's happening. Are they? If we could look at this report, if these reports, if it was easy to read these, is there any correlation? Is it because we don't know about stuff that things are happening, or is there absolutely no correlation, just 2 things that are happening at the same time?
I suppose that is where the commissioning director's reports come in near to triangulate that position. So if I step back a bit, there's an organisational piece to do on performance anyway, and thinking some of that through in terms of the teams supporting the teams that drive it, the teams that manage it. We've just gone through a reset and review with all of our provider organisations, and we've just reset some of the contract and performance meetings with all of the provider organisations. We're doing the same with NHS England. So in effect, you know, for now we've got the data that sits in the performance report, which is just a culmination of everything that we've got, and the directors of commissioning reports are the ones where you're supposed to be triangulating and pulling out some of those core risks at the moment. But I suppose Hugh's perfect saying is the next stage to maturity. So I'd like to see us moving into a bit more of a mature performance framework, if you like.
I think we've had a good conversation in relation to sort of some of the challenges and the issues. Lots and lots of data, lots of information. Challenges, putting out the analysis and the so what. But again, it sounds like there is a plan in place to consider that. So we'll capture an action. You're going to bring some additional resource to oversee this. and they'll update at our next meeting. Great, thank you very much. Is there anything that we've not touched upon around performance, either in the commission director's reports or here, that we just need to flag? Hopefully, it's all the plan should be it's all captured in the commissioner's reports, but I don't want to make that assumption.
And just to say that the subcommittee is there to facilitate that. We're quite happy to take early drafts which aren't necessarily perfect but represent steps forward.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to 4.4 Manchester Arena. It's been busy today, Gavin.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the R106, so that's recommendation 106 WAST capability report. This was developed by WAST in response to recommendation 106 of the Manchester Arena inquiry, which identified critical failings in emergency response coordination and capability. WAST undertook a detailed review of its preparedness and response functions that was in response to recommendation 105 and submitted the report to JCC in line with those national recommendations. The review of this report has been prioritised as a key programme in the JCC Foundation plan for this year. So in terms of summary, there are 4 elements to our assessment of the report. There are stakeholder workshops, legal advice, a collaborative assessment workshop, and independent expert review. So in terms of the stakeholder workshops, those are complete. 4 structured workshops were held with representation from Health Boards, WAST, and NHS Performance and Improvement. Those sessions allowed WAST to present the report in detail and allowed stakeholders to explore operational and strategic implications of those recommendations and fostered early collaboration and transparency across the system. In terms of legal advice, we've now received the independent legal advice, which we commissioned earlier this year, and we received that late June 2025. It's very helpful in clarifying the JCC's statutory responsibilities for responding and any legal risks associated with implementing the recommendations. This will ensure any decisions are made within a sound legal framework and will form part of our recommendations to Joint Committee. The collaborative assessment workshop was held on the 27th of June. That brought together Health Board Commissioner leads, Directors of Planning and Emergency Planning colleagues in this very room to systematically assess the report's recommendations. It was extremely helpful workshop, so thank you for colleagues for releasing your staff to attend. Agreement was reached on several items. However, others required some further clarification, prompting the need for a follow-up session with WAST colleagues in attendance. And we're in the process of engaging the colleagues within WAST to follow up on that workshop. In terms of the independent expert review, in line with the previous recommendation from Joint Committee, and external expert reviews in the process of being commissioned. This will give us an impartial assessment of the report's findings to help strengthen credibility and robustness of the review process. So those 4 elements will form part of our recommendation that we will bring to a future Joint Committee meeting. Colleagues are asked to note the content of the report, the progress to date, the next steps, and the project risks, which are in the paper. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Gavin. And are we checking in terms of how our responses evolving and developing through this very engaged approach is aligned with what other ambulance services in the UK are doing?
We are in conversation with colleagues in NHS England. Whilst and I have a conversation with colleagues there in coming weeks. It appears we're taking a very robust approach from what conversations we've had so far. And we're satisfied we are taking a balanced, rounded approach.
We're also really clear in terms of what might be our responsibility as a commissioner, or what's the responsibility as a provider, also the Home Office's responsibility in terms of its accountability for some of the more specialist response services.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of response, specialist assets, those are commissioned directly with Welsh Government. So those are not forming part of our recommendations to the committee, albeit we have assessed them as part of our response. And as part of the conversation with health boards, we have asked them to take a view around what would they deem responsibility of the ambulance service itself, what's commissioning risk, and what is something which needs Welsh Government intervention.
Just in terms of the point around what else is happening in the UK, I think it's really important that as far as we can, we're aligned, and that there's not one ambulance service taking a very different approach to others. And also, this is also going to be absolutely vital, isn't it, in terms of cross-border working for us. There's a major incident in North Wales relying on North West Ambulance, and similarly in terms of SWAST, in terms of the south of Wales, to making sure those formal agreements are in place and vice versa in terms of going across the border in major instances in England. So I think it's about making sure that nuance is built into the plan.
Would you like us to form part of that recommendation back to joint committee? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Nia.
Hi, I think this is something similar to what I've said in the previous meeting. 3.3, I'm not on mute. Risk 3.3, it says, should the JCC fail to commission services, there is a risk of reputational damage. Well, is that the worst thing that would happen? I realise that significant harm or loss of life is mentioned in risk 3.1, but I would say that's the major possible harm in risk 3.3 as well, is it not? Or it seems that reputational damage doesn't seem as important as people dying.
Any other observations? This is again an update report, and it's moving in the right direction, and so that the timescale of bringing this back to the JCC meeting.
It's dependent upon the availability of an independent reviewer when we can get that back. So it's very much
like for November and September, essentially.
I think so. Yeah.
Any other points? No. We note the report. Thank you very much. Governance and assurance. We know to Matt in terms of the corporate governance report.
Thank you, Chair. Today's report provides an update including the Welsh Health surplus that have been received and available on the Welsh Government website. 2.2 is around the accountability report for 24-25, and the draft of this was approved at the last meeting. This was presented to the CTM Audit and Risk Committee on the 25th of June, and then approved by the CTM board following day, by being submitted to Audit Wales and Welsh Government. Final document will be presented to the CTM AGM on 31st of July and will then be published on the JCC website. The 2.3 brings an update against the annual committee effectiveness survey as set out in our standing orders. The survey findings are presented at Appendix 1. The findings, the feedback have been reviewed, a view to developing key areas for the JCC to focus on over the next year. Those 4 key areas are listed below, include the risk register and the need to work as we've discussed today, and that's something also around the papers and the focus of papers. The 4th point touches on the forward plan of committee business. That's attached as Appendix 2, and that includes both joint committee meetings and also items for the strategy sessions or development sessions in between as well. So joint committee members are requested to note the report and to note the key areas of development that have fallen out of the annual review of effectiveness.
Comments or questions for anybody? I'll have to note the report and also the focus around those 4 key areas that were highlighted through the committee effectiveness work. Be happy with that. Yes, in every time I've been involved in a board where there's a conversation about committee effectiveness, the length and approach of papers is a consistency that happens everywhere. So so it is within this review as well. But again, I know there's been some work that's been undertaken around report writing, so that's hopefully we'll see that the impact of that as we move forward in terms of more succinct and clear reports that go into the detail that we need to.
It's further work planned. There's SOP just been published, follow-up sessions. So yeah, hopefully we'll get there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. You note the reports. Thank you. We're now moving on then to items for information. We've got a range of items. So Audit and Risk and Assurance Committee. To note that. Quality, safety and outcomes. Excuse me, wish to add?
No, we talked about, the sort of risk in terms of ambulance when we heard the patient story.
Look at planning performance of the finance subcommittee.
Nothing really to add. I mean, most of the issues there, issues we discussed and we'll be discussing anyway.
Thank you. Individual patient funding request panel. You'll have anything you wish to add? No, that. And then the Welsh Kidney Network.
Nothing to add, but just to note that the governance framework is a reflection of the current governance, and obviously we're waiting for the chair's feedback on the governance report, and that might be amended as we move forward.
And in terms of, so we hope to then to bring I think it was captured in your report, wasn't it? We hope to bring the report itself back to JCC when?
So we're waiting for some feedback from the chair. So as soon as I've seen what the feedback is, I'll know whether, you know, what we need to do around it. I mean, potentially we could bring a discussion to the development session in August, because we know what broadly the recommendations will be, and then obviously we'll need to do a formal SLT response.
And it has been an independent review that Steve Coombs has led. So, right, so open-ended, but hopefully, if not development session, then the September committee meeting. Okay, thank you. Right, then we note those. Any other business? Any reflections on the meeting? In a warm meeting here. I don't know what it's been like people on the screen, but we've had doors open with slightly wilting. The air conditioner has shut down. But apart from that, any other thoughts or reflections? Lots of good business. Yeah. And obviously, I think it's important that we have alluded to some items in this part of the meeting which we need to touch on a little bit later on as well. But I thought the papers were good. Thank you for that. And they came out in a timely way. But again, there was a challenge at our last JCC meeting. So thank you, Matt, for doing that. I know they came out. You had to stay late one night, I guess. They know us. Good. All right. Thank you for that. Date to the next meeting is 16th of December. Just to say, I'm on holiday then, and so I'll ask one of my lay colleagues to chair the meeting in my absence. Can I suggest that what we do now is we're running early, which is good, that we have a 15-minute break. We look to reconvene at 20 past 12 if colleagues are happy with that. And to have a meeting in camera in committee at that point in time, and that we resolve to exclude members of the public and press from that meeting due to the nature of the items to be discussed. Are you happy with that? Thank you. See you in 15 minutes.